Let me ask you something. If I told you there's a single inexpensive vitamin, one most men over 50 are actually deficient in without knowing it. That's been linked in research to better erectile function, more consistent energy, and deeper, more restful sleep. Would you want to know what it is? Most men assume that fatigue, weaker erections, and restless nights after 50 are simply the inevitable price of aging. In my years as a urologist, I've found that a significant number of these complaints trace back to something far simpler than anyone expects: a widespread, often undiagnosed nutrient deficiency that quietly affects nearly every system we're talking about tonight. I'm Dr. Emily Carter, and today I want to walk you through exactly which vitamin this is, what the research actually shows about its connection to erectile function, energy, and sleep, why deficiency becomes so common after 50, specifically, and how to actually use it correctly. Because timing and dosage matter more than most people realize. Before we get into it, if you appreciate this kind of direct, evidence-based conversation about men's health, hit subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Let's get into it. The vitamin I'm talking about is vitamin D, and I want to start by correcting a common misconception. Most people think of vitamin D purely in terms of bone health, something relevant mainly to older adults worried about fractures. That picture is seriously incomplete. Vitamin D functions less like a traditional vitamin and more like a hormone precursor, influencing systems throughout the entire body, including several that are directly relevant to what we're discussing tonight. Vitamin D receptors exist throughout vascular tissue, testicular tissue, and areas of the brain involved in mood and sleep regulation. This is precisely why a deficiency doesn't just show up as one isolated symptom. It tends to show up as a cluster of seemingly unrelated complaints: fatigue, low mood, poor sleep, and yes, erectile difficulty at most. Here's what surprises most of my patients. Vitamin D deficiency is remarkably common in men over 50, and it's becoming more common, not less, largely due to modern lifestyle patterns rather than any specific medical condition. The primary natural source of vitamin D is sunlight exposure on skin, which triggers your body's own production. As men age, skin becomes naturally less efficient at this conversion process, meaning the same sun exposure that generated adequate vitamin D at 30 produces meaningfully less at 60. Combine this with the reality that most men over 50 spend the overwhelming majority of their day indoors, at work, in cars, in front of screens, and you have a population that's chronically underproducing a nutrient their bodies increasingly struggle to synthesize efficiently in the first place. Geography plays a role too. Men living at higher latitudes or those who simply live in climates with long winters often cannot produce adequate vitamin D from sunlight for large portions of the year, regardless of time spent outdoors. Add in the widespread and increasing use of sunscreen, which is important for skin cancer prevention but does reduce vitamin D synthesis, and it becomes clear why population-level studies consistently find a significant percentage of men over 50 sitting well below optimal vitamin D levels, often without any symptoms obvious enough to prompt testing. Let's get into what I know most of you are here for specifically. The research connecting vitamin D to erectile function is genuinely compelling, and understanding the mechanism helps explain why. Erectile function depends fundamentally on healthy blood vessel function, specifically the ability of blood vessels to relax and allow increased blood flow on demand. Vitamin D plays a direct, measurable role in this process, supporting the health of the endothelium, the thin layer of cells lining every blood vessel in your body, and supporting nitric oxide production, the same molecule targeted by common erectile dysfunction medications, because it's essential for the vascular relaxation response that makes an erection possible in the first place. Multiple studies examining men with erectile dysfunction have found meaningfully higher rates of vitamin D deficiency compared to men without erectile difficulties. Some research has gone further, finding that vitamin D deficiency correlates with the severity of erectile dysfunction, meaning men with lower vitamin D levels tended to report more significant difficulty than men with only mild deficiency. This doesn't mean vitamin D deficiency is the sole cause of erectile dysfunction, which frequently has multiple contributing factors: cardiovascular health, blood sugar regulation, testosterone levels, and stress among them. But given how directly vitamin D supports the exact vascular mechanisms erectile function depends on, correcting a genuine deficiency represents one of the more straightforward, low-risk interventions available, and one that's frequently overlooked entirely in favor of jumping straight to medication. Vitamin D's relevance doesn't stop at vascular health. It also plays a meaningful role in testosterone production specifically, which connects directly back to the energy and vitality most men over 50 are hoping to maintain. Research has found that men with adequate vitamin D levels tend to have measurably higher testosterone levels compared to men who are deficient, and several intervention studies have found that correcting a genuine vitamin D deficiency through supplementation produced modest but meaningful increases in testosterone over several months. This effect appears most pronounced specifically in men who were deficient to begin with rather than men with already adequate levels, which is an important distinction. Supplementing without a genuine deficiency shows considerably less benefit, which is exactly why testing your levels directly, rather than assuming you need it, matters. Beyond the direct hormonal connection, vitamin D deficiency is independently linked to fatigue and low energy through its broader role in mitochondrial function, the cellular machinery responsible for generating energy throughout your body. Men who correct a genuine deficiency frequently report improved energy levels within a matter of weeks, sometimes before any change in blood work would even be expected to show up, which suggests the mechanism extends beyond hormones alone. Now here's where timing becomes genuinely important and where a lot of the advice circulating online gets this backwards. Vitamin D receptors are present in areas of the brain directly involved in regulating sleep-wake cycles, and research has found associations between vitamin D deficiency and both poor sleep quality and shorter sleep duration. This is part of why correcting deficiency has been linked to improved sleep in several studies. However, I want to address something directly, because it affects how you should actually take this. Some research suggests that taking vitamin D too close to bedtime may, for some individuals, interfere with melatonin production, since vitamin D and melatonin share some overlapping regulatory pathways. This means the common advice to simply take vitamin D right before bed isn't necessarily optimal for everyone, and some men actually report better sleep outcomes taking it earlier in the day. With a meal containing some dietary fat to improve absorption, since vitamin D is fat-soluble, my practical recommendation is this. If you find that taking vitamin D before bed doesn't affect your sleep negatively, and some men notice no difference at all, there's no strong reason to change the timing. But if you've been taking it right before bed and have noticed any difficulty falling asleep since starting, shifting it to morning or early afternoon alongside a meal is a reasonable adjustment worth trying. I always tell my patients that the single most important step here is getting an actual blood test, specifically a 25-hydroxyvitamin D test, rather than simply assuming you're deficient and starting a supplement blindly. This test is inexpensive, widely available, and gives you an actual number to work from rather than guesswork. For men found to be genuinely deficient, typical supplementation protocols range from 1,000 to 4,000 international units daily, though this should be guided by your specific test results and your doctor's recommendation. Since significantly higher doses are sometimes used short-term under medical supervision for more severe deficiency. Taking vitamin D with a meal containing some fat significantly improves absorption, since it's a fat-soluble vitamin that isn't well absorbed on an empty stomach. Retesting after 2 to 3 months of consistent supplementation is a reasonable way to confirm your levels have actually improved, rather than assuming the supplement is working without ever checking. I've had patients who assumed a low dose, over-the-counter supplement was sufficient, only to retest and discover their levels had barely moved, requiring a more targeted dose adjusted with their doctor. I want to take a moment here because addressing foundational deficiencies like this is exactly the kind of thing I built into a complete resource called the Iron Age. It walks through vitamin D alongside every other major lever affecting men's health after 40, testosterone, sleep, strength training, nutrition, stress, and prostate health, with a clear practical protocol for identifying and correcting exactly these kinds of overlooked gaps. For $49.99, it's less than a single specialist visit, and it's something you can reference for years as you continue optimizing your health. If these videos have been useful to you, I genuinely encourage you to check it out. The link is below. I want to be direct about the limitations here, because I never want to oversell a single intervention, no matter how promising the research looks. Vitamin D deficiency correction is not a cure for erectile dysfunction, particularly in men whose difficulty stems primarily from cardiovascular disease, diabetes, low testosterone from other causes, or psychological factors like anxiety. It's also not a replacement for addressing other foundational habits, sleep consistency, regular exercise, and stress management, all of which affect erectile function, energy, and sleep quality independently of vitamin D status. What correcting a genuine deficiency does offer is a legitimate, evidence-supported piece of the broader picture, one that's frequently overlooked because it doesn't get the same attention as more heavily marketed supplements or medications, despite having a comparably strong research base behind it. For men who are significantly deficient, and population data suggests a meaningful percentage of men over 50 fall into this category, correcting it can produce a genuinely noticeable improvement across all three areas we've discussed tonight, sometimes more noticeable than men expect from something this simple and inexpensive. Before I move into some of the finer details, I want to address why vitamin D deficiency specifically tends to go undiagnosed in men for years, sometimes decades, longer than it probably should. Part of the problem is that vitamin D isn't included in most standard annual blood work panels by default. Unlike cholesterol or blood glucose, which are checked routinely as part of a general physical, vitamin D typically has to be specifically requested either by the patient or because a doctor has a particular reason to suspect deficiency. This means the overwhelming majority of men simply never get tested unless they specifically ask, regardless of how many symptoms they may be experiencing. Compounding this, the symptoms of vitamin D deficiency, fatigue, low mood, poor sleep, reduced libido are all symptoms that overlap heavily with dozens of other common conditions, from low testosterone to depression to simple overwork. This symptom overlap means both patients and physicians often reach for more commonly discussed explanations first, sometimes going through extensive workups for other conditions before anyone thinks to check something as simple as vitamin D levels. I've had patients who went through cardiac workups, sleep studies, and mental health evaluations, all reasonable steps given their symptoms, before a routine blood panel finally revealed significant vitamin D deficiency as a meaningful contributing factor that had been overlooked the entire time. I also want to address something practical that a lot of men don't think about. Vitamin D levels fluctuate seasonally in a way that can genuinely affect how you're feeling at different points in the year, particularly if you live somewhere with distinct seasons. For most men, vitamin D levels peak toward the end of summer, after months of greater sun exposure, and gradually decline through fall and winter, often reaching their lowest point in late winter or early spring. This means many of the symptoms we've discussed tonight, fatigue, low mood, disrupted sleep, reduced energy, often intensify during these exact months, and men frequently attribute this to seasonal changes in general, shorter days, colder weather, holiday stress, without recognizing that an actual measurable drop in a specific nutrient is contributing directly to how they feel. If you've noticed a pattern where you consistently feel worse during winter months specifically, this is worth mentioning directly to your doctor and worth testing for specifically during that seasonal low point, rather than only testing in summer when levels are naturally at their highest and might mask a deficiency that becomes significant later in the year. Some of my patients maintain a consistent supplementation routine specifically through fall and winter, tapering during summer months when natural sun exposure covers most of their needs, which is a reasonable, practical approach once you understand your own seasonal pattern through actual testing. There's another factor worth understanding, particularly relevant given how much I discuss body composition on this channel. Vitamin D is fat soluble, and this has a significant, often overlooked implication for men carrying excess body fat. Vitamin D gets sequestered in fat tissue, meaning that men with higher body fat percentages often have measurably lower circulating vitamin D levels, even with equivalent sun exposure and dietary intake compared to leaner individuals. The vitamin isn't being lost, it's being stored in fat tissue rather than remaining available in the bloodstream where it can actually be used by the vascular, hormonal, and neurological systems that depend on it. This creates a compounding effect worth understanding. Men carrying excess weight often face multiple simultaneous factors working against their testosterone, vascular health, and energy levels: elevated aromatase activity, converting testosterone to estrogen, increased inflammation, and now reduced available vitamin D despite potentially adequate intake or sun exposure. This is precisely why addressing body composition alongside a specific nutrient deficiency often produces better results than addressing either factor alone. Men who both correct a vitamin D deficiency and work on reducing excess body fat frequently report more significant improvement than men who address only one piece of this picture in isolation. I also want to address something practical that trips up a lot of my patients. Not all vitamin D supplements are created equal, and understanding the difference matters for actually correcting a deficiency effectively. Vitamin D supplements generally come in two forms: D2 and D3. Research consistently shows that D3, also called cholecalciferol, is meaningfully more effective at raising and maintaining blood levels compared to D2, also called ergocalciferol. If you're purchasing a supplement, checking specifically for D3 on the label is worth the extra few seconds, since D2 products, while not harmful, tend to require higher doses to achieve the same effect and don't sustain elevated levels as consistently over time. Beyond the D2 versus D3 distinction, I generally recommend patients choose reputable brands that have undergone third-party testing, since supplement regulation is considerably less rigorous than pharmaceutical regulation, and quality can vary significantly between manufacturers. This doesn't need to mean the most expensive option available, but it does mean looking for some indication of third-party verification, which most reputable brands will display clearly on their packaging or website. Something worth understanding is that vitamin D doesn't function in isolation. Several other nutrients play supporting roles in how effectively your body actually uses the vitamin D you're taking or producing. Magnesium is required for the enzymatic processes that convert vitamin D into its active form in the body. Men who are simultaneously deficient in magnesium, which is also common, particularly in men consuming a diet heavy in processed foods, may find that vitamin D supplementation alone produces a less complete response than expected, simply because their body lacks adequate magnesium to fully activate and utilize it. Vitamin K2 also plays a supporting role, helping direct calcium to bones rather than soft tissue, which becomes more relevant at higher vitamin D doses that increase calcium absorption. This isn't meant to complicate what should be a simple intervention. It's meant to explain why some men report a partial response to vitamin D supplementation alone, and why working with your doctor to look at the broader nutritional picture, rather than fixating on a single isolated nutrient, tends to produce more complete, satisfying results. I think it's worth setting honest expectations here, because supplement marketing often promises immediate, dramatic results that don't reflect how this actually works physiologically. For men with a significant confirmed deficiency, meaningful improvement in energy and mood often becomes noticeable within 3 to 6 weeks of consistent, appropriately dosed supplementation. Sleep quality improvements tend to follow a similar timeline, though they can vary considerably between individuals depending on what other factors might be affecting sleep simultaneously. Erectile function improvements tied to the slower process of improving vascular health and endothelial function typically take somewhat longer to become noticeable, often in the range of 2 to 3 months, though some men report improvement sooner. None of this happens overnight, and I want to be clear that vitamin D correction is not a substitute for immediate solutions if you're dealing with significant, distressing erectile dysfunction right now. It's a foundational piece worth addressing alongside whatever more immediate support your doctor recommends, not instead of it. Men who understand this realistic timeline tend to stay consistent with supplementation long enough to see genuine results, rather than giving up after a week or two when marketing promises of instant improvement don't materialize. I also want to address the other end of this conversation directly, because more is not always better, and vitamin D toxicity, while uncommon, is a genuine risk worth understanding. Vitamin D toxicity typically only occurs with very high doses taken over extended periods, well beyond what's found in standard over-the-counter supplements taken as directed, but it becomes a more realistic concern when men take multiple supplements simultaneously without realizing their combined vitamin D content, or when high-dose prescription-strength supplementation isn't properly monitored with follow-up blood work. Symptoms of toxicity, which stem primarily from resulting elevated calcium levels, can include nausea, weakness, and in more severe cases, kidney complications. This is exactly why testing before starting and retesting periodically once supplementing matters so much. It's not just about confirming the supplement is working. It's about ensuring you're not overshooting into a range that creates its own set of problems. This is a case where working with your doctor rather than self-directing an aggressive supplementation regimen based on online advice genuinely matters for your safety, not just your results. Before wrapping up, I want to mention that while supplementation is often the most reliable way to correct a confirmed deficiency, certain foods can meaningfully support your overall vitamin D status alongside whatever protocol your doctor recommends. Fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines are among the richest natural dietary sources. Egg yolks contain modest amounts, and many fortified foods, including certain dairy products and cereals, are specifically supplemented with vitamin D during manufacturing precisely because natural dietary sources are so limited. I don't want to overstate how much impact diet alone can have here. For most men with a significant confirmed deficiency, diet by itself rarely closes the gap quickly enough without supplementation, but building a few of these foods into a regular weekly rotation supports your levels over the long term and reduces how quickly you slide back into deficiency once you've corrected it, particularly heading into the lower sunlight months I mentioned earlier. I also get asked constantly how much sun exposure is actually needed to meaningfully support vitamin D production, and this is worth addressing directly, since the answer isn't as simple as more is better. For most men, roughly 10 to 20 minutes of midday sun exposure on a reasonable amount of exposed skin, arms and legs, for example, several times per week during sunnier months, supports meaningful natural production for many people. This varies considerably based on skin tone, latitude, and season. And I'm not suggesting men abandon sun protection altogether, since skin cancer risk is a genuinely serious consideration that shouldn't be dismissed in pursuit of a single nutrient. The practical takeaway is balance. Brief, unprotected exposure during lower risk periods of the day, combined with normal sun protection during longer or more intense exposure, allows for reasonable natural production without meaningfully increasing skin cancer risk. For men in climates or seasons where this isn't consistently possible, which describes a large percentage of the population for a significant part of the year, supplementation becomes the more reliable, consistent solution, rather than something to feel like you're failing at through diet and sun exposure alone. Finally, I'd encourage any man starting this process to track a few basic things alongside his blood work, not obsessively, but consistently enough to notice genuine patterns. General energy levels through the day, sleep quality, and how rested you feel upon waking, and any changes in mood or motivation are all reasonable things to informally note over the weeks following a confirmed deficiency correction, combined with an actual follow-up blood test at the 2 to 3 month mark. This gives you a genuinely clear picture of whether the intervention is working for you specifically, rather than relying on vague impressions or marketing promises. So here's what I want you to walk away with. Vitamin D deficiency is remarkably common in men over 50, driven largely by reduced sun exposure, less efficient skin conversion with age, and modern indoor lifestyles. Correcting a genuine deficiency has real research behind it, supporting improved erectile function through better vascular health, improved energy through both hormonal and cellular mechanisms, and improved sleep quality through its role in brain regulation. This isn't a miracle cure, and it doesn't replace addressing other foundational habits or underlying medical conditions. But it's one of the most overlooked, inexpensive, low-risk interventions available, and getting a simple blood test to check your actual levels is worth doing rather than guessing. If this was useful, let me know in the comments whether you've ever had your vitamin D levels checked. I'd love to know. Subscribe if you want more honest, research-backed conversations about men's health like this one. I'll see you in the next video.